In 20,000 years, man has changed his way of living only twice. The first was from hunting to farming, and although that change was fundamental, we were still a part of the natural world in which we had always lived. Later, much later, we changed the farm for the factory, the village for the town. This time, the break was sudden, violent, and complete. It took only 100 years, and today, 9 out of 10 of us live and work in the towns. But man had stayed for too long under the clouds and stars to make this change easily. Although the towns have their compensations, although we have never lived so warm and dry, so plentifully, somehow we do not fit naturally into them. Work was once rationed by the seasons. There was change and rhythm. Today, the pace is fixed. Summer and winter, the time clock doesn't vary, and the assembly line runs at a steady speed. As industrialization becomes more efficient, so the work becomes more impersonal, more automatic. However much working conditions improve, the lighting more natural, the air purer, the human body, and particularly the human mind, were just not designed to be shut in all day at a desk or bench or counter. In many ways, industrial life has confined and restricted. In others, it has freed us. As the average working week fell from 80 hours to 41, there was time to spare. As the machines became more efficient, more productive, there was a surplus to spare. Only a short time ago, life in Britain consisted mainly of working, eating, and sleeping. The 20th century added a new element, leisure. Leisure is highly individual. What's pleasant and right for age can be dull or frustrating for youth. But for age or youth, much leisure time is taken up with outdoor recreation. And for town people, the time they spend in the open under the sky is important to the health and welfare of the individual and the community. Recreation means literally recreation, remaking, refreshing, recharging. This was an ideal which generous-hearted men had dreamed of for long generations. But the actuality, like any other matter which concerns millions of people, is involved and complicated. Because so much leisure is centered on the outdoors, this is where many of the problems lie. Already the numbers of people taking part are vast, the facilities inadequate. In the last 20 years, the increase in outdoor recreation has been phenomenal. For many schoolgirls, happiness has 4 legs and a tail. Currycombs, hay nets, and mucking out, all parts of a fascinating mystique. There are 1,200 riding stables, and 40 new ones are opened every year. 3 million men and women fish. The Birmingham Angling Association alone has 58,000 members and owns 600 miles of fishing rights. As many as 6,000 fishermen may compete in a single contest. Sailing has grown faster than anything else. In 20 years, the number of sailing craft has multiplied by 20. There's hardly a piece of water which doesn't have its club. 400,000 people sail. 1 million play golf. 60 drives for 6 shillings. and every week 3,000 people buy a basket. The range is open from 9 in the morning until 10:30 at night, every day of the year except one. Under the guise of the modest word leisure, a sweeping change is taking place in the way we think and live and work. Economically, for example, leisure affects the whole life of the country. This one factory makes 10,000 dozen golf balls a week, and British golfers lose or wear out 7 million golf balls a year. But this is only one part of the golf industry. There are clubs, bags, trolleys, clothing, mowing machines. Maggots have little charm except for fishermen. A single maggot may land a specimen carp, even a national angling championship. 20 maggot factories sell up to £500,000 worth wholesale. These are the smaller industries.
Over 50% of motoring in this country is for leisure, and the annual sale of cars to the domestic market before purchase tax is added is £500 million.
Even larger, the sale of petrol, oil and spares. There are 40,000 garages. The yearly petrol bill for cars and motorcycles, £660 million. There's not a government department, a local council, an industry, which isn't in some way involved. It's inevitable that a social change which is so great, so new, so unforeseen, will cause problems. And they start in our towns. When Wren was building St. Paul's 300 years ago, he made plans for using the River Thames for leisure. But at that time, idleness was a sin, and it was inconceivable that space should be so misused. That's why our cities have grown as they have. The Thames is the biggest open area in London. There are 70 miles of built-up bank, but only a tiny fraction is for pleasure. Mile after mile is occupied by power stations, wharves and factories. The gesture is reminiscent of the boyhood of Raleigh, but the horizon gives little promise. This spot is exceptional. At least you can step down to the water. For the most part, the river is cut off from London. The passage of ships is a fine spectacle, but there are few places where it can be enjoyed. There are a few parks and gardens from which the river can be seen, but not approached. There are a few pubs with balconies, and their popularity gives an indication of what the banks of the Thames could be. Not only is the river walled off, we have allowed it to be used as the town ditch. There are even floating dust carts to collect the more solid refuse. Sewage works, factories and power stations pump their waste into what was once the finest salmon river in Europe. Below Tower Bridge, one of our few attempts at using the river for people. A couple of 100 yards of muddy foreshore covered with sand and made into a pleasure beach. Twice a day, the tide washes it with polluted water. But such is the demand that on a fine afternoon there might be 1,000 children there. It's not until after Putney Bridge that there's a break in the high stone embankments, where boats can be launched, where the river can be got at. 8 million people live within reach of the Thames. For most of them, it's just a name. They never see it. And this is one of the first problems which leisure presents. We need to look with a cold eye at our towns. This is where people are. This is where most of the facilities will have to be. The countryside presents its own problems. Britain is small, its population large and expanding. And country will only remain country if it's quiet and reasonably empty. The Norfolk Broads were once just this. But the motor car put them within reach of 18 million people. Now the Broads have 1 million visitors a year. This weight of people makes two problems. The decay of the country, the competition for space between rival users. Sailing is a Broadland tradition, and today there are 2,500 boats. This doesn't sound many, but to sailing boats must be added 5,000 motorboats. Their numbers have quadrupled in the last 20 years. There are about 100 houseboats and 2,000 small boats and canoes. 21 passenger boats carrying between 40 and 250 people. Finally, the cargo ships which use the river. In 15 years, boats of all kinds have increased from 3,000 to 9,000. And every year, people come in increasing numbers. In only 10 years, 35,000 fishermen became 75,000. In the confined waters of the Broads, speedboats are not compatible with fishing, water skiing with sailing. The continual wash of boats breaks down the reed cover which protects the banks from erosion. Many birds nest in the reeds, and the waves destroy their eggs and young. Once the reeds have gone, boats can be moored, and their continual bobbing wears the banks away. If a bank did go, it would flood the farms and villages around. The sad part of the story is that people who only want the peace and quiet of the country, just by coming, turn it into another version of the town they were trying to get away from. One thing is certain, that if we don't plan the use of the countryside, it will be spoilt for everyone. The commonest form of recreation in Britain is going for a ride in the car. And again, because there are so many involved, the problem is formidable. For example, the M6 has put the Lake District within easy reach of the industrial north. From the fast 3-lane motorway, traffic bottlenecks into the narrow local roads. On fine weekends, the whole area becomes inextricably blocked. You can crawl, but you cannot stop. It's estimated that in Britain now, we need 10,000 5-acre picnicking sites where cars can pull in with ease and people can enjoy the view, have tea, and let the children play. Of course, the roads can be improved, but if millions of people want to travel on the same day at the same time, no road system will ever cope. There are answers, but they will depend on the recognition of the part leisure will play in the future and a revolution in our thinking. For instance, we may have to give up the Saturday-Sunday weekend and stagger it over the whole week. Going for a ride is the most common form of recreation, but that pattern changes. The longer people have a car, the more they get used to it, the less they regard it as an end in itself. When they get to the end of a journey, they want something to do. This is another problem. How can people learn to use their free time to the best advantage? For those who have mobility, it's difficult enough. For the many who are confined in the towns, especially the youth, it's often impossible. A report on outdoor recreation says, creative use of leisure can mean that latent energy is tapped, unused powers of body and mind and spirit are employed, and imagination works on fresh material. The opportunity to participate is all important in what people do. If they live close to a swimming pool, they will most likely learn to swim and enjoy all the pleasures that sun and water can give. If there isn't a pool nearby, a boy or girl may never learn to swim at all. But it's not just a matter of having the facilities at hand, and it's not only youth who are involved. Many would like to have a try at archery or fishing, but just don't know how to go about it. If these boys happen by chance to join the right youth club, where people know about such things as sailing or climbing, it could alter their whole lives. We shall have to realize that the full use of leisure time is an acquired skill, and that the teaching of it is as important as that of any other subject. The report on recreation adds, free time can be a blessing, it can also be a curse. In the remote north of Scotland, in Glenmore Forest Park, is an indication of present demand and of what the future might hold. 7 years ago, there was a rough forest road to the foot of the mountains. From there, a few people climbed a long, steep path to ski. Then, to improve the skiing, they formed a non-profit-making group and built ski tows and lifts. The road was widened and extended to high on the mountain, topped by a car park. Although the nearest big towns were 125 miles away and the roads often ice-covered, the crowds poured in. Very soon the ski lifts were overcrowded and plans had to be made to build more. The nearby small village of Aviemore also changed. Once the facilities were there, not only skiers, but tourists and holidaymakers came too. As an experiment, the ski lift was opened in summer. Now, 70,000 people use it for the thrill of the ride, the views, and walks on the mountains. The camping ground was provided by the Forestry Commission. They owned Glenmore Forest Park and realized that forest land could be used for leisure as well as growing trees. Last year, 80,000 camping tickets were issued. Every year sees new developments. The local hotels weren't big enough and new ones were built. The Coylham Bridge has accommodation for over 200, a skating rink and a dance floor. In a remote part of the glen nests one of Britain's rarest birds, the osprey. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds built a hide for public viewing. 24,000 people visited it during the 3 months of the nesting season. There's also the Aviemore Centre, the first of its kind in Britain. There are 2 hotels which sleep 200 people, chalets for another 250, restaurant space for 500, the first cinema in Aviemore, shops and a ballroom. The centre is designed for either good or bad weather. There's a heated swimming pool, an ice rink and bowling alley. But the emphasis is on the outdoors. There's a large ski slope of plastic brush matting where people can learn, summer or winter. You can take a course in fly fishing, or climb, hill walk, bird watch, canoe or sail. Adding skiers to campers to climbers to holiday makers, maybe 500,000 people come every year to this once lonely place. What has happened in the Aviemore area shows how unpredictable the future of leisure is. People are only just beginning to find out about the things there are to do and what activity suits them.
The government has become increasingly concerned and active in the problem of recreation and the outdoors. Legislation has been passed by Parliament setting up 2 countryside commissions, one for England and Wales and one for Scotland.
But the real demand for facilities is near the big towns. Although we are short of space, there are 150,000 acres of ruined industrial land which could be reclaimed. There are hundreds of miles of abandoned railway tracks, which could be turned into long-distance walks, cycle tracks, bridle paths, and nature trails. The stations would make ideal hostels. There are the canals, 1,400 miles of them, through some of the most beautiful parts of the country. The government has already planned to spend £1 million a year to keep them open for cruiseways, fishing and walking. There are places like Drake's Island in Plymouth Sound, and although its setting is exceptional, it was just as much a ruin as any abandoned industrial site. For 400 years, the island was a fortress. When the army left, they blew up the buildings. With local initiative, it was turned into an adventure center for youth. Some of the work was done by contractors, but the boys themselves have cleared hundreds of tons of rubble, repaired roofs and doors and windows, made clubhouses. The work continues while the island is open for its real purpose. Drake's Island is a good example of how waste land can be reclaimed. It's also a good example of how willingly youth cooperates if only there's an opportunity. But however effective local efforts are, from now onwards the problems are so great that they will be solved only by research, planning and finance on a national scale. In East London, planners are at work on the first major scheme for leisure. The Lee Valley runs for 23 miles from the Thames north to Hertfordshire. In 1966, by Act of Parliament, the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority was established. Its task, to create a new kind of park so big that it will take 15 years to complete and cost £30 million. The valley is a conglomeration of industry, agriculture, public utilities, and waste land. In many ways, it's an area which has been passed by. But its great advantage is that it's in the right place. 3.5 million people live within easy reach. The area around the valley is one of the most built-up parts of London. In places, there's only 1 acre of open space for every 2,000 people. The first work on the ground was planting a tree nursery. Tens of thousands of trees will be needed for the valley. And by growing their own, the authority will save a lot of money. 5 or 6 years, the trees will be transplanted and will shelter the amenities of the valley. Because the choice of leisure is so varied, so personal, a park of this kind must plan for the individual. Some young men want the violence and sound of motorcycle scrambles. The problem? Where to put them so that they won't disturb others. There are many problems and few precedents, and 150 clubs and societies have already been consulted. The valley has 7 miles of reservoirs, and past them, cable cars or monorails will carry people to the main recreational centers. The river banks will be landscaped and planted with trees from the nursery, and passenger boats will run the length of the Lee. Old gravel pits will be turned into water sports areas, with an Olympic rowing course and shallow training lakes where the young may learn in safety. There will be reserves where the natural life of the valley can be conserved. Places like Peter Scott's Wildfowl Trust, which does much work in education and research and has 200,000 visitors a year. There will be open-air concert bowls, ornamental gardens, gardening centers, picnic areas, and recreational centers. When the valley is finished, it will absorb 1 million people a day. Important as the Lee Valley is in itself, its real importance may be that it's an acceptance of the fact that we're at the beginning of a major social change. That in the future, leisure is going to play as important a part in our lives as housing or education. That we shall be able to cope only by organizing it as we do any other major social service. There are 3 good reasons why this is so. For within a generation, 55 million people will increase to 70 million. 10 million motor cars will increase to 30 million. The working week will probably have fallen to 30 hours. And this island will not have stretched an inch.